Welcome to the solution video for the WPF Core To-Do App Challenge. Let's jump right into the code and create a new project. And for this, we want a WPF application. And we want it to be a WPF.NET Core application, which this is still in preview. So if you instead want to do a .NET framework, the changes will be minor that you'll see, and as far as our code goes, I don't think there's anything that will change, so that should be fine. Let's call this WPF to do, and we'll call this the WPF to do app challenge, or to do challenge app actually. Hit create. And so once this loads in, we have our WPF application. Now we have a choice here of how we want to do things. We could use an MVVM framework. I'm going to choose not to keep this simple, because the point is not so much how to do with MVVM as is how to do this to-do list in a WPF application. So let's not have a tool do part of our heavy lifting for us. Let's do it all ourselves. Now I'm going to try and keep things as simple as possible in here. So I'm going to create a grid dot column definitions of 2. So this is going to be a column definition, and columns have on them width. We're going to set this to auto. And we'll do the same thing for our next one. I'll add one more that's star. The reason I do star at the end is that way my 2 columns will grow to the width they need, but the third column will take up the rest of the space instead of making both of my second column, let's say, the rest of the space. If I wanted to split the difference and make the 2 columns be the same width, then it makes both of them star and then not have to worry about anything afterwards because they each fill to their overall space needs. But I don't think I'm going to do that, because then what would happen is if my left column is very wide and my right column does not need to be, star on both would make them equal width. And I don't want that. So let's do auto star. And if we find that instead we want the list to be star or the other one to be star, we could do that. But I think this for right now is going to be fine. And I'm not going to do rows right now, because what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say that let's shrink this down just a bit. What I'm going to do instead is say that I'm going to use stack panels for my 2 different sections. So I'm going to have a stack panel for column 1 and a stack panel for column 2. And a stack panel allows you to just basically put things in on top of each other or next to each other. So the orientation is important, and you want to set that to vertical for our orientation, and grid.column, the first one is column 0. We're going to do the exact same thing for another stack panel, and this is going to be column 1. That way we have 2 panels. Now the first panel, I'm going to have a text block that's going to have some text in it. And really simple, I'm just going to say to-do list, something like that. And then it's up there. Notice it's kind of small. So let's change our font size. So our font size, let's set it to be, let's look at 18 and see what that looks like. That's pretty reasonable. I think maybe we could do a little bit bigger. 22 seems a little more beefy. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set some padding, actually some margins. I set some margins on this stack panel to be, let's look at what 10 looks like. That seems reasonable. And I'll do the exact same thing for the other stack panel, which does mean in the middle where they meet, there will be 20 for that margin, because 10 for each stack panel. So if you want to adjust that, what you do is set either the left margin over here to be 0, or on this one the right margin to be 0, or you could meet in the middle and set the right to be 5 and the left to be 5 for each of these two stack panels. But I think 20 in the middle is just fine. Okay, so we have our text block that says to-do list, and then we're going to have a list box with a name. We'll set that name to to-do list box, like so. For right now, I'm not going to give it any parameters. I'm just going to say, hey, this is a to-do list. That's it. I could give it some margin or padding and those type of things. For right now, it's going to be just the way it is. Eventually, I think what I'll do is I'll put a maximum height on it. And that way it will allow the scroll bar to pop up if we need to scroll beyond that. But for right now, I'll leave it set as is. So there's my list box. And the other stack panel, what we'll do is we'll put a few different options. So the option, I think we're going to have a text block that's going to be add new item. And then below that we'll have a text box. We'll give it a name of new to-do item. And you know what? That's all we're going to do for the text box. And I think what I'm going to do is actually cut these out for a second and put in a stack panel with an orientation of the edit item, so we can swap those out. Now I do want to add a button after each of these. So button with a name equal to add new to do. And we'll say add to do, like so. Or we can just say add. I think that works. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it down here, but instead of add, it's going to be edit to do item, or add to do. That's fine. And we're at, instead of saying add, we'll say update. So let's just take off this visibility hidden for right now. So you can see that, oh, when it says add new item, let's make it say edit item instead. And now we have an edit section and we have an add section. So this is our add section and this is our edit section. They may ask the question, why didn't you just give a name to each text block? And then you could hide the three, so you could hide, this text block, this name, and this name. Well, that's three things to do. Whereas in DPF, I can just hide this entire stack panel and we're good to go. Now we probably should play some margins and some padding here, but I'm going to leave it alone for now. I am going to add some buttons to my to-do list where I'm going to have an edit and a remove, or edit and delete. So let's do that. Right below the to-do list, let's create a stack panel with an orientation of horizontal and create a button with a name of edit to do and say edit. And then we'll have another one, which we already have an edit to do. We do. So let's call this update. And the text box should be update to do item. And that's yelling at us, which is interesting. It says this item is not found, but it is found. Update to do item. So then up here, the reason why is we have not completed this section maybe. I don't know. We're going to find out in just a minute. We're going to call this the delete to do item. And it's saying to delete item is not found. I think we have a rebuild issue here. Let's make sure. I think this is just an editor issue. So if we do this, it should come back. And in fact, it does. So it's just a rebuild needed. That's probably one of those quirks of the new editor. So we're going to say delete here. And let's put a little bit of padding around these. So let's say padding equals 5, like so. And we'll set margin. And we'll set the left-right margin to be 10 and 0 for the bottom. Well, let's set it to be 10, 0, 10, 5. How about that? And we'll do the exact same thing for this one. So it's got 10 on both sides. And in fact, we could set this to 0 to move it back to be just 10 away. That's the idea that left margin, right margin. So we could, to make it kind of more equal, we could say 5 and 5. All right. And now we have our to-do list. Let's put some padding on that as well. And I'm kind of tweaking things. I don't have to, but I kind of want to. So margin, let's just set the bottom. So 0, 0, 0, and 10. There we go. So the margin and padding, margin's on the outside, padding's on the inside. So padding gave me the inside dimensions, additional. Margin gave me the outside of the button dimensions, or the text box. It starts at left, and then top, right, and bottom. With that, I think that we have everything we need to get started. So let's go back here, and I don't think I have it in my paste menu. So let's just say that visibility equals hidden. So that's gone. And now let's start wiring up these buttons. So let's start with the add, since that's the one that we're going to use first. So we can double click on the button if you want, or we could add an event. Let's just double click on it. It creates that click event. Notice it's right here. Click, add new to do underscore click. So here's where the work is going to get done. So this means we need to start setting up some code. Let's start by adding a class. And if you did the last challenge with WinForms, this looks pretty similar, but just a bit different based upon the different things you want to do. So this is the to-do item model. And inside here, make it public. In fact, I can always reverse those two. We have a property. This one's going to be the to-do text. We're going to have a property that is going to be the is complete. That's all we really need. And then in here, let's create a binding list. So you add the using statement and have a binding list of to-do item model and call this the to-do list. And we'll set this equal to new binding list because we don't have any data coming from the database, so we need to initialize to a blank list. So with the add new to do, we need to do some work. We need to figure out what's in that text box and add the list. In the other video, I created separate methods. In this one, I'm going to do it right in the event. The difference is how easy it is to bring out to a class library, or how is it to reuse those methods. I'm going to not worry about reuse in this particular case. So what I'm going to do is say, let's create a to-do item model. To-do equals new, and let's do our curly braces. And don't forget, we need to set, to be explicit on this, we need to set this equal to false by default. Now, implicitly it is false, but I want to be explicit in that. So then all I need to do is say to do text equals, and our text box is called add, and it's, let's look at what it actually says because I forget it now. New to do item. Okay, so it's not add, it's new to do item. New to do item dot text. We don't put that semicolon at the end. That's just a habit. And then after that, what we need to do is say to do list dot add to do. And now after we do that, we also set the new to do item dot text equal to empty string to clear that out. Now if we set our binding here, so let's set our binding to be to do list box dot binding dot data source, or I'm sorry, add. And now take out the trash is in that list. Buy a car, that's in the list, and buy a house. Tim's in the buy-in mood. So there's our three things in our list. Is it pretty? No, it's not. But does it work? Yes, it does. So that's a start. Now we have the ability to see our items in the list. We can't yet edit them, delete them, or complete them by doing a strike through. Let's change that. Let's wire up the delete button. That should be pretty easy. So delete button, what it's going to do is going to figure out which item was selected in this list. And then from there, it's going to remove it from the to-do list. So let's start with the selection. So that's called get that to work. Let's try it out real quick just to make sure that we're on the right track because we're going to reuse that code. So test, test 2, test 3. I don't want test 2, so delete it. And it's gone. So that delete code works. Now let's work on the edit. This is a little trickier because the edit just moves it over to the box that's here that right now is invisible. This box right here. It's going to move the text into the text box, and it's going to save that item for edit. And then when we click the update button, then what's going to happen is it's going to save that text back into the object. So let's just put it right here. We're going to put to do item model and say editing item. And we're going to set it equal to null to begin with, and which is the default for an object, but we'll set it to null to be sure. So when we click the edit button, this is what's going to happen. It's going to start by getting the to do. Once it gets the to do, then it will set the, actually we can just set it right to the editing to do. Like so. So now it's set up that editing to do. Now that that's happened, we need to do a few things. We need to set the value. Let's set it first before we make it visible. We're going to set the value of update to do item. So update to do item dot text. Whoops. Dot text. We don't see it right now, so we can't double click on it. But no worries, we could make it hidden or visible and then double click it, or we can just say click equals, and notice if I tab on, once I've selected this new event handler, if I double click or tab on it, it creates the update to do underscore click method, which is right here. So what this will do is it's going to take the item that's been selected. So the editing item dot to do text equals update to do item dot text. So take the text from the text box and put it back into the item we're editing. Remember, because we're using objects, that means it also updates the object in the list because it's the same object. We're just both referencing that same location in the memory. All right, now once we've done that, then we can swap these two. So we can say that this one is hidden and this one is visible. We should also wipe out this text now that we've captured it. So we can do this before or after. Let's do it after. That way you don't see it go away. It's super quick either way, but I think that's a little bit cleaner. Let's run this and make sure that it works. So I'm going to say test, test 2, and test 3. And I say, well, actually, this would be test 1, so I hit edit. Now it says edit item. I can say test 1 and update. And now it doesn't refresh this list, but I'm betting if we add test 4, it will not refresh the list still. If we edit, it still is test 1. So we just need to make sure that we get a redraw of this entire list because it's not right now capturing individual properties being changed. So let's modify that, but we do know that at least the edit/update works. Now I'm using hidden versus collapsed, and that's the reason why we're getting when I hit edit on an item, it moves down. Let's also change that. So I believe collapsed will allow us to collapse things down and not use up that space. Hidden keeps the spacing, but when you have something below it, it's noticeable it's there. So test, which is spelled wrong, test 2, and I say, oops, I want to edit TST. So hit edit, and now notice item is here. I can say test and hit update. Of course, it doesn't show it yet, but we'll get there. So let's figure out how to make that display properly. To do that, we have to go to do item model and implement iNotify. Let's move my mouse so you can see it. iNotify property changed. Control dot to add the using statement for that. Control dot again to implement the interface, which is just one event. Now let's add our helper method to this. Private void notify property changed. And this is going to have the caller member name. Control dot to add the using statement for that. And let's call this string property name. And what this method does is it allows us to say, hey, something has changed. Fire this event, but only if this event is valid. Now I'm using the example that came right from Microsoft, but there is an easier way now, which is to not have to check for property change, but I think we're going to still do it. So if property changed is not equal to null, then property changed this, which is this instance, and then new property changed event args, and pass in property name. And that will fire this event, but only if, oops, I need a default value. That will fire this event, but only if the property change is not null. We can make this simplified by doing this. So this is the example you'll see on Microsoft's documentation. So if you're reading Microsoft documentation, this is exactly how they do it. But if you want to see the newer version using the C#6 code, you can do this, which is one line, and what it does is it says invoke. So you have a question mark first to say, is this null? And if it's not null, then you can invoke that property, and here's how you call it. So that makes things a little easier. But now we need to modify both of these to be full properties. So control dot to convert to full properties for each of these. And now we can put set on a different line. We can put this on a different line with curly braces. And after this, and this is really ugly right now, but notify property changed, like so, and then control ED to format that nicely, and all of a sudden it pops out and it's really pretty. Let's do the same thing here. So I'm going to put this on its own line. I'm going to put this on its own line, a curly brace. I'm going to put curly brace after here. And then after this line, I'm going to say notify property changed, and then do my formatting, control ED, on my machine at least. If you have a slightly different configuration in your Visual Studio, it might be something different. I think KD maybe. It depends, but if you go to Edit and then go to, I believe it's Advanced Format Document, you'll see what the command is to call that. Or you can just click on this. So now we have notify property changed for each of these, and that should be all we need to do to allow WPF to alert whenever there is a change. So test, and then test 2, and test3, we say, oops, let's edit this to be test1 update, and now it's updated. So now we're all good to go with the edit. But we're not quite done yet because we need to add a double-click event on our list box. So mouse double-click. We'll create a new handler for that. And what this will do is it will mark the item as complete. So let's figure out what the item is. We'll capture that just like before. So now we have the var to do. Actually, let's just be consistent with everywhere else and call it like that. And now we have the current one being edited, and we'll say to do dot is complete equals true. Now this will always set it to true. It will always complete the item. However, maybe what you want is you want the option to toggle this. What you could do then is say equals not to do dot is complete. And that will toggle complete versus not complete. I think I want that for this operation. Now, right now, we're not displaying if it's complete or not. Now, this is where things get a bit more tricky because there's not a simple way to say, well, this data template, it should be this if this, otherwise do this. WPF is a little more verbose. Otherwise, we could have two of these and just say text decoration equals, and I believe the option is strike through. Let's just make sure that's in fact the case by running this. This should strike through every single one of them. So if I say test and add, notice it's crossed out. So that's what the eventual goal. The problem is, how do we switch between the two in our display? And so the way to do that is we're going to have to set up a resource to do that for us. And I'm going to do that. Let's do that right above this, just so we're close. So we're going to say window.resource, like so. And it's going to yell at us and say, hey, can't find that in here. So let's actually go up one level and put it there. Oops, that wasn't the issue. Let's put it back down where it was. We have it closer where we want it to be. The issue was I said resource, not resources. And there is no IntelliSense for that right now, for whatever reason. And so it was yelling at me. But it is still yelling at me here. It's saying resources is not recognized or not acceptable. Let's put it back. Some days you hate WPF, right? Okay, there we go. So it does have to be outside of your window. I'm sorry, outside your grid in the window itself. Okay, so window.resources. And this is where we're going to create a couple of resources for us so that we can apply that down in our list box. Essentially, what we're going to do is replace this right here with a resource that handles all of our binding work. So this is going to be a little bit of trial and error as we do, and that's how you do things. But I'm going to say I want a data template, and this data template is going to have a name, or a key, a key, and that key is going to be, let's just call this the item template. That's the normal template. And then inside here, we're also going to have another one that's going to be the other one. That's going to be the strike through one. So let's grab the normal one for right now. So this is the normal one. I'm going to copy and paste this. And this one is going to be the completed item template. And so we're going to have the strike through on this one, but not on this one. So that's the difference. So that we're going to have a data template that has our bindings inside, our text block, how we want to set it up, but this one has the strike through, this one does not. So if item template, so this sets a style that we're going to apply to our overall list box item. So we'll have a setter with a property of content template. So this is going to be a content template, and the value is going to be equal to a static resource, and that resource is item template. And at the end of this, we can close this out. So what this does is, by default, we're going to apply item template as the list box item template. And by default, that is the regular to-do item. However, we're going to do a trigger. So style.trigger. Oops, I hit double dot. And let's set the binding on this. So trigger dot, oops, triggers dot property. And that's going to be the is selected. That's the property. And then the value equals true. Whoops. Actually, the value is going to be a binding on, and this is going to be the is complete in theory. And then from there, we're going to have a set of our own. Actually, no, I think I got that backwards. Let's start over here. The instead of property, it should be binding equals. That's just the binding for the trigger. And then let's close this out so it has a close. But the binding is on complete, and then the value equals true. That's why I think it's going to be a data trigger. So like I said, I'm still kind of putzing around here trying to figure this all out, and I think we're getting closer. So we have the data trigger to be is complete, which I believe, let's just make sure that's right. It's is complete. Yes. So we're good to go there. So if that's true, then we need to have a setter like so. But instead of item template, we need to use our completed item template instead. So with all that being done, we now have this style that we can apply, and it's called container style. So now we can come down to, we can copy that and come down to our list box, and inside of here, we can say item container style equals, and we have a static resource, and that static resource is container style, which we just pasted in here. We can get rid of all of this. We no longer need it. In theory, that all works. Let's try it out and see just how far off we are. So if I say test and I hit add, it's there. Test2, I hit add. If I double click here, it crosses it out. I double click here, it crosses it out. I double click to uncross it out. So now this is working as expected. Let's add something a little bit larger. Take out this is a static resource section, and we have this style, and it's called container style. So this is what we're applying to our list box item. That's what it applies to. By default, we have the content template, which is where the data goes in. The value is item template, which is this template we created right here. And that template is just that one text block. But we also have a trigger, and a trigger happens whenever something is true or is met. So in this case, we have a data trigger, not a regular trigger, a data trigger. That's what I got confused on. A data trigger, we're binding on the value of is complete. And if that value is true, this trigger is met, and so it overwrites the content template, which we've already set by default. It overwrites that with a new content template. And that new content template is this static resource completed item template, which is this one right here, which in this case is really simple. It just has the addition of that strike through. Now, we can get a lot more complicated here if you wanted to. This data template doesn't have to be one item. We could have a grid in here with lots of items and change things all around. We could have multiple different data triggers here for different conditions. But in this case, we just have one condition, the strike through. So with that, I think we have a completed first part of our application, the primary challenge. Let's review. So we've created a to-do list application that displays to-dos. You can add to-dos. We can remove to-dos or delete them. And when we can edit them as well. And when we double click on it, it's going to strike it through as being complete. All right. So we're now done the primary challenge and can embark on the bonus challenge. So the bonus challenge has two parts to it. One is that we implement drag and drop on our list, which sounds intimidating. And then second, that we place the to-do items that are complete at the .remove to do, and then to do list .add to do. That will remove it from the list wherever it is in the range and add it back at the end. Let's make sure that works correctly. Once this starts, we will add a couple of to-dos, test 1, test 2, and test 3. Let's do this. Let's double click this to cross it out. And now it's at the bottom and test 2 is at the top. If I double click test 2, it's now at the bottom and test 3 is at the top. Now notice if I double click it again, it does not go to the top. That was not what we were asked to do. All right. With that being said, let's double click it again. And yes, it goes to the bottom again. let's figure out drag and drop. And this is actually going to be easier than you might think it would be. I'm going to paste up here at the very top an open source project URL. It's on GitHub, and it's called Gong WPF drag drop. Now, I do not advocate you always go and get an open source project, because if you depend on projects and they are no longer updated, then you might have a problem. However, the other side of that argument is if you try and rebuild everything yourself, as in reinventing the wheel, then what happens is you spend an awful lot of time on this setup work that somebody else has already done for you. Also, you now have to maintain it for things like bug fixes, security holes, new versions of WPF, and all the rest. So you haven't really saved anything, because this is an open source project. If it were to go away, you can still have a copy, go get a copy of the source code and make your own modifications. So you maintain somebody else's code, but now you're at the modification stage, not the create first and then modify stage. Okay? So it is going to save you some time. So let's go to dependencies, right click, and say manage NuGet packages, and let's just search for Gong, G-U-N-G. And right down here we have the Gong WPF drag drop, which does support .NET Core, which is awesome, but it's just a UI thing, so it's no big deal. We'll hit install, and now if we look at our documentation, it's pretty simple what we need to do. We need to add, first of all, a namespace. That's what these up here are. So XML and S for XML namespace. And they recommend DD for drag drop. That's fine. And we'll say equals, and then in here, URN, and it's gong-wpf-drag drop, but the IntelliSense did pick it up. Now, what we can do is go to our list box. So our list box is right down here. And then in here, we can add a couple of new things. DD, which that's the namespace, or that's our shorthand for the namespace. So DD, and then drag drop dot is drag source equals true, meaning you can drag from this box, and then DD for drag drop is drop target. And that's also true, meaning you can drag and drop from this list box and to this list box. Let's hit start and just see what happens. So, take out the trash, mow the yard, sell the old car. And so you know what? Sell the old car is a pretty high priority. So I click it and drag, and now sell the old car is at the top. Take out the trash. I don't really care about that. Now it's at the bottom. So now we have drag and drop added to our application. So it seemed like that was a big deal. But because we used a third-party library that has solved all of those problems with drag and drop, now we can just very easily drag and drop things around wherever we want. So that's adding drag and drop, and we already have the crossed out. We could even drag this back to the top, even though it's been crossed out. Okay, so that completes the bonus challenge. So in a lot of ways, the primary challenge was actually the more difficult one. That was the one that has the strike through, and that's can be quite difficult or challenging with WPF because of how you have to display those things. But otherwise, the drag and the drop, really easy with a third-party library. Now, if you want to do WPF drag and drop on your own, you can. And there's ways of doing so. It just takes quite a bit of code and a lot more code that looks like this. Okay, code that can be quite dense at times and quite hard to understand. So, yes, you can do it. But again, do you really need to reinvent the wheel when someone's already done the work for you and is maintaining it? I would recommend you check that open source project out. Give them a like, give them a heart, and maybe even drop a note and say thank you for just making an awesome library. Okay? So that is the solution for the WPF To Do app challenge. Thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.